afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Centre for Policy Studies CapEx event space. Great to see so many of you here. My name's Tom Clougherty. I'm the Research Director at the CPS. I'll be chairing our discussion over the next hour. And our topic this afternoon is what can Conservatives do for families? I'll say a couple of things just by way of general introduction. One is that the 2019 General Election Manifesto promised to make Britain the greatest place in the world to start a family. The other thing, a few weeks ago, seems like a lifetime ago, but I'm sure that's the same for everybody, we published a report at the Centre for Policy Studies called The New Majority by James Frayne of Public First, and it was a detailed look at the 2019 Conservative electoral coalition, its values and the things that you could do to appeal to them and make them vote Conservative again in 24 or 25, whenever it will be. And I bring this up just to say that it identified an extremely diverse and disparate electoral coalition. Rich, poor, Leave, Remain, urban, rural. A few things unite them, but one of the key things was that every single Conservative voter group that James identified listed family as their number one personal value and motivation. And so I raise these two things just to ask the obvious question, do any of us really think that Conservatives are doing enough for families in their policy and in their communications at the moment? Anyway, to discuss these questions and more, we have an absolutely marvellous panel for you. I hope you'll agree. We're going to hear from Dame Rachel de Souza, who is the Children's Commissioner for England, a former head teacher. We're going to hear from Victoria Prentis, who is Member of Parliament for Banbury and Minister of State at the Department for Work and Pensions. Speaking third, we have Danny Kruger, Member of Parliament for Devizes, a former speechwriter to David Cameron and a former political secretary to Boris Johnson. It wasn't in my notes. Apparently you're a PPS now?
No, I was
no,
I resigned. That was it.
Okay, there we go. Sorry.
Getting it
You
right.
led me astray.
Yeah.
And finally, we're going to hear from Luke Stanley, who is a senior researcher at Onward in their Social Fabric programme, and the author of a report I very much liked recently on family tax allowances. It's a pretty straightforward format. We're going to hear a few minutes of introductory remarks from each of our speakers, then some discussion, and then questions from those of you in the room. So, without further ado, let's hand over to our first speaker, Dame Rachel de Souza.
Thank you so much, and it's great to be here, everybody. So when I came into role as Children's Commissioner about a year and a half ago, the first thing I did was survey children across the country as they were coming out of lockdown and ask them what were the barriers or concerns as they were coming out of lockdown and what did they want for their futures. One of the key themes that came out of that, unsurprisingly, was how important family was for children's happiness. Where children were in unhappy families by their own perception, they were 9 times more likely to be unhappy overall with every aspect of their life. And I could go on. So when Kemi Badenoch asked me to undertake an independent family review, I jumped at the chance because it was absolutely of central importance to children. Now, what we did was use, I wanted to do a family review like no other. So we went out and rather than go out with a perception of what family should be like, we went out to seek what did people in England think about family, what was important about it, what did family look like. And we used qualitative, quantitative research. We used all the open 20-year Millennium Cohort studies. We really, really got under the skin of it. And what came back was absolutely fascinating. I think some just very big, very sort of intuitive, I guess, headlines was just how important family was to the well-being of every individual who was in it. And when it was going well, their well-being was going well. And I can sort of bring some of those points out. But also, in terms of children, having a positive relationship with your parents at age 13 not only affected GCSE outcomes, they were better, but it also affected how much they earned at age 25. And we've actually proven that and shown that now. So really, really important. So what did we find? Well, there are 8.2 million families with children in the UK. 63% of these are married couples with children, 14% cohabiting, and 23% headed by a lone parent. So marriage has dropped a bit, cohabiting has increased a bit, and lone parenting has stayed relatively the same, far higher than in most of the rest of Europe. Now, when I looked at the lone parenting stats, it was very, very interesting. Yes, there are differences by race, religion, region of living. If you live in Cotswolds, you're 5% of families are headed by a lone parent, whereas in Knowsley, 31% of families are headed by a lone parent. But that's all fine. The biggest sort of causal or correlative link was if you are of the lowest earning decile, you're not working, and if you have a low level of education, you're far, far more likely to be a lone parent. Now, I don't mind saying that. I'm from Scunthorpe. The cold spots of lone parenting, Scunthorpe is one of them. And I look at that data and I say to myself, economic investment, opportunities, education, absolutely key for those girls. And I am unequivocal in saying how important that is. So we did find out some interesting things. We also found the nuclear family really might be used in statistics, but actually the way people understand family is so much broader than that. The talk of grandparents, uncles, cousins, family being the couple down the road, because I live far away from my own family, and that couple down the road, who help us and we care so much about them, we call them auntie or uncle. That wider understanding of family and how much family does to support, young couples and families with children. And I think that's really coming to my final points. One thing we really established in this review was the protective effect of family. So whatever income decile you're in, we absolutely proved in this research that people's well-being is far greater if they believe they can rely on the support of family. And indeed, family is where people turn right across the country for support when they need it. That's what they told us. They turn first to family, then to friends. And when we talked about services, they wanted services to be familial and local. So those things came across very, very strongly. So I think in answer to the question, and I know there'll be lots of detailed questions, but I'm going to have to leave it quickly. In answer to the question, I would say, of course, government should be putting family absolutely at the centre of every bit of policy making and thinking they're doing, because the nation does. The language most used to me was family is everything, family is love, family is my happiness, family is my entire life. Now that is the language, that is the motivation of the people in this country. So of course government should be understanding what the family is and actually making sure that policy understands that and meets it. So enough from me.
Brilliant, thank you, Rachel. And Victoria, over to you.
Well, violent agreement from here. Now, you may have noticed we've had a bit of a leadership election this summer. And who can tell me if they can remember the first line of one of the candidates' speeches? Was, for me, family is everything. Now, the poor fellow didn't win, and apparently his children use that against him on a daily basis when, they want pizza for supper. They recite back, Daddy, for you, family is everything. But I couldn't agree more with what Rachel had to say. And I just wanted to throw out a few thinking points, really, for how government can help people to create and to maintain their own family life. I started my political career, and indeed continued my political career, very close to Mrs. Andrea Leadsom, who is my neighbour in my constituency. And well before either of us had gone into politics, she made me, frankly, become a trustee of something called the Parent-Infant Partnership, and got me really, really excited in early years work. And I think that's now mainstream. It's now funded by government. And I think the work that she has done has become very integral to Conservative thinking. We had a very punchy byline, which actually isn't completely true, but it doesn't half make you think, when we started those PIPs, which were 2 is too late. Now, that isn't quite true, and we know that there are ways of putting things right, but it doesn't half concentrate the mind on where government thought and resources need to be. And then another area of my life, which I share quite freely, is the practicalities of bringing up very young children and paying for childcare. I think it's really important when we talk about childcare that we don't pretend that either emotionally or financially that this is easy for practically any family at all. I was a senior civil servant when my children were very small. In fact, probably I wasn't senior at that point, but I was a mid-ranking civil servant when my daughters were very small. They're now grown up. And I lost £54 a month going to work for 5 years. That was a decision we could take as a family, and I wouldn't say we were pleased to do it, but we were prepared to do it. That is not really a realistic option, nor should it be for most families. So I think when we talk about childcare as a sort of panacea, we need to do that in a very careful, financially aware terms. I'm always very pleased with wraparound care in schools, which I think is a solution to this. We know schools are a good environment, positive environment for children. They're getting something out of it. 8 till 6 care has always seemed to me to be a really practical solution to the needs of many working families. And I think, I don't want to steal Danny's thunder because he's just written a lot of reports and convened a lot of reports about this, but I think we also need to look at the other societal ways in which we support families. So whether you call it the Supporting Families Programme or Children's Hubs or whatever the Families Hubs we now call them, I think Danny will come on to tell us all about them.
I will now.
There you go.
Okay.
Segue.
All right. Thanks, Victoria. Thanks, everybody.
Crikey. Sorry, we're all right, it's only water.
Okay.
She says.
Well, I'm very pleased to be on. I mean, what a great panel. And so quickly to say, as a party, I think we're good at talking about the economy, mostly. And we certainly have a narrative there and a vision of what is required. I think we often make the mistake of thinking that the non-economic sphere, the social sphere, family life, community life, the culture itself is sort of somehow none of our business, either beneath our notice or too private and was too important for politics to trample on. Actually, it is not possible for government to be neutral in these spheres, and anything that the law does, that policy does, affects family and community and culture. So it is right that we have conversations about this. And of course, then, as Rachel said, and by the way, Rachel's review is such a landmark piece of work because of the evidence it demonstrates of the significance of family life and the absolute centrality of strong and stable families for children's outcomes. That demonstrated the importance that people place on families. I think if we are to be, boringly utilitarian and sort of economistic about these things, it is also apparent and evidenced how significant families are for the prosperity and growth that we all want to see. Family life is the proper foundation of a stable economy, as is wider community. And as Victoria says, a lot of interest in wider civil society policy. When people say family is their whole life, I honour that. Of course, that's always the case. It is the most important thing for any of us, you would hope. But I think it's a slightly depressing modern phenomenon whereby people, for their family is their whole life. Actually, a healthy life includes life outside the home. So obviously that means a fulfilling job and career most of us would like to have, but it also includes, or should include, proper participation in your community. And I think the modern economy, and it's to a certain extent our culture and our policy, in a sense, drives people. They basically spend all their time at work or in the home, and with no space for anything else. And the loss of that third sphere of life in the neighbourhood, I think, is a really significant loss. So Victoria's right. What I think we need to support families, as well as the foundations of economic growth, is a very vibrant civil society sector that's supporting people. That includes, and the government is, to its great credit, has been introducing family hubs and supportive programmes for that. But generally, we do make it very hard for families, and in this country particularly. I understand we have the smallest homes and the longest commutes in Europe, according to some measure. That is absolutely catastrophic for family life. If you're spending hours on the road to get home, and then there's no space anyway, the harm that must do to families overall is really significant. We have a childcare and a social care system which actually makes the home the last resort, not the first resort. I'm exaggerating, but But we instead we subsidise residential care for older people at a higher rate than we do domiciliary care at home. So we make it more worth your while to put your elderly parents in a home than to look after them where you probably would like to, in your own home or in their home. Likewise with childcare, we push people into all-day nurseries rather than having a flexible offer that enables them to use the money that's available in ways that suit them and support the family unit itself. And crucially, and most importantly, the fiscal system. I'd like to go the whole Japan, by which you basically get a tax cut if you live near your elderly parents. What a brilliant solution that is. But if we can't do that, then let's at least recognise the household in the tax system. And this was Nigel Lawson's great intention in 1990 when he introduced personal taxation, to also allow people to transfer their personal allowance, so that a family in which one parent is staying at home to look after elderly parents or the kids don't get penalised. They can have two allowances. That was always the intention when he introduced personal allowances. It never happened. There was a sort of half-baked married couples allowance, which Gordon Brown more or less abolished. We kind of more or less revived, but at a derisory level. So there is no recognition of household responsibilities in the tax system, and I think we should have that. And I think Liz Truss did make that commitment in the leadership election. So I think we need to recognise households, which reform childcare and social care to support the family unit, and we need housing policy to create family homes where people need them. Thanks.
Danny, thank you very much. Luke, over to you.
Fantastic. Well, I just wanted to start by apologising. I've caught the dreaded conference cold quite early this year. So, yes, I'll shift over here maybe a little bit. But yeah, I thought I'd just start off by talking a little bit about Onward and the sort of work we do in this area. So I lead their programme called Social Fabric, and what that's all about is families, communities, and how we can strengthen both. And I think it's really important, as Danny was just talking about there, about the links between the two, because if you strengthen family, you strengthen communities as well, because family is one of the crucial ingredients for making strong communities, and that's shown not just in the work that Rachel's been doing and in her review, but it's also shown in our sort of something that Onward has done. Is we've sort of measured how strong every community across the UK is, and if you look at if you compare that against data on how strong families are, there's a really big correlation. So really looking forward to the debate.
All right, Luke, thank you very much. There's an awful lot that we can pick up there. I mean, obviously, families being central to life means that they're also central to all kinds of different policy areas. We've talked about tax, we've talked about housing, talked about childcare, talked about care for the elderly. So all sorts of different things that we could pick up on. I do want to get into some of those policy specifics. But maybe first, if I could start with a more general question, and that is to ask the panelists whether they sense what I think I sense, which is a little bit of reticence talking publicly about these issues among Conservatives, and maybe it's sort of thinking back to John Major and the Back to Basics campaign and that sort of backfiring, the sense that sort of family values agenda is too old-fashioned or too socially conservative, that's somehow out of touch with modern Britain. And so do contemporary Conservatives, who I think almost all of them will recognise the massive importance of these issues and want to talk about them, but maybe lack the language and the approach. And so just a sort of general reflection from our panel, as Conservatives in politics and government, is that something that you worry about? Is that something that you think we can tackle? And maybe, Danny, if we start with you and we can go along.
Well, yes, and as I said, I think we're more comfortable talking economics, and we either disregard. I mean, the libertarian wing sort of doesn't think that families matter very much, or they think that they matter so much that it's no business of the state. And I honour that perspective. The problem is that we've invaded the social sphere. The state has done that over years in totally legitimate response to social challenges. But honouring the family doesn't mean disregarding it. And I think as a party we do need to do this. And actually why Rachel's work is so important. The evidence really is there. And I think the fact that she gathered so much qualitative evidence in human terms about how people really feel about their family life and how important it is for children means that we have a complete imperative to address this. So I think that is true, and it's in a sense legitimate and appropriate that we are very wary of and we must not moralise. I mean, we're not here to judge. We are here to generalise. That is the business of politics. We have to generalise wisely. We can't make policy for every individual. We have to make policy that applies across the board. And that's why flexible policy is so important, because it allows people to make their own choices. But we do need to generalise about the sort of social outcomes that we want to see. And we know from Rachel's work and others that stable families are the best guarantee of that. So it is absolutely right that Conservatives address all this.
So as the government's independent Children's Commissioner, I speak to all political parties, and I just think it's interesting to feedback and observation from those conversations, in that pretty much every other party I have conversations with have brought up that they're promoting the primacy of family. And it's actually been really surprising to me that how much I've had to push in my conversation with many of our ministers to get them to speak about family. And I think the family review, that's why I was so delighted when Kemi asked me to do the family review. And I hope we've now created a language that can be used to really talk about family in government, and that it's an inclusive language. It recognises families in all its shapes and sizes, but that they're important. I'd also say that government surely has a responsibility to understand family, so that given that government money is supporting services, and policies are for the people in the nation, given that family is, they've told us how they understand family, it's important that those policies meet families where they are and understand them where they are. So I'll leave it at that. But I'm surprised I don't hear more talk about family, and I hope we're at a watershed and a turning point now.
I mean, Victoria, do you think we'll hear more?
Yes, I do, and I think it is really quite important that we're not shy to talk in the sort of language we're using at the moment about what goes on at home. And I also worry that employers are quite shy about straying into this space too, and that this is one of my problems at the moment at DWP is getting the 9 million inactive people into work. Not all of them will want to, not all of them need to, but some of them would very much like to be in work. But trying to get the conversation of the employer round to sort of flexible working, by which I don't just mean working at home, I mean the whole gamut of flexible working in a way that means that those people want to, in many cases, return to the workplace, does mean some fairly gritty conversations about home and family life. And I don't think it's just the Conservative Party that's shy of this.
I definitely agree with Danny that there seems to be a lot more comfort with talking about the economy rather than family. But I think it can definitely be done. If you look at people like David Cameron, he was a very socially liberal leader. But he did all this stuff on family. He introduced marriage allowance. He introduced this troubled families program, which I think has been rebranded now. But
supporting.
Yes, thank you. He modernised marriage by extending it to same-sex couples. He piloted ideas about parenting classes, which didn't quite come to fruition. But he was very energetic on this, and he wasn't apologetic, and I don't think we should be either.
And actually, look, if I can stay with you with my second question or theme. We obviously heard during the leadership campaign about greater recognition of families and households within the tax system. That presumably points towards transferable tax allowances. I think it's been rather overlooked obviously there were lots of things to discuss from the mini budget, but there was again a reference to a shift towards a more family-friendly tax system in there. You've written about this. I mean, maybe give us your sense of what's realistic. What could we expect or hope for?
Definitely, I'd be very happy to. So in our recent report, which Tom referred to earlier, called Family Fortunes, which you can find on our website, we basically sort of looked at the history of the tax code and went back to Nigel Lawson's original plans, as Danny was talking about, and basically we came up with 3 big things that could be done, a sort of menu of options that the government could consider. One would be to extend, at the moment, I should explain, at the moment you can transfer 10% of your unused personal allowance on your income, which is about £12,000, to your spouse if you're not using it all. So that basically amounts to about a £120 tax cut a year. So basically what we're saying is the first thing that could be done would be to extend that to cohabiting couples that have kids. So basically extending sort of the benefits of family to people that aren't married but have kids. That would be sort of, as I say, the 10%. That would be cost about 90 million, I think, is for our. Obviously, this is before all the inflation, but last year we cost it about 90 million. Another thing that could be done would be to, rather than just extend it, we could make it even more generous for couples with families and caring responsibilities. So one of the things we looked at was how much would it cost to give to everyone that had kids under the age of 5, allow them to completely transfer their entire tax allowance that wasn't personal allowance that wasn't used, and that came to about 650 million, which obviously sounds like quite a lot, but given some of the sort of recent announcements about tax cuts, is relatively reasonable. Yeah, maybe I don't know about that. And then also we also looked at sort of, if you were to give it to people that had lots of family caring responsibility, looking after elderly parents and that kind of thing. And I have my figure here somewhere, and it is 450 million, that would be. So that's a sort of a range of options really that the government could look at and decide what would be the best way about going about strengthening families.
And I don't know if I'm 100% right on this, but just as a ballpark figure, I think that full fat, complete transferability between married couples would be something like 5 or 6 billion.
Yes, that's right.
So
yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
Again, we have a skewed impression of what's expensive these days. I don't know whether that's a cheap tax cut or an expensive one. Victoria, obviously, tax is not your remit at DWP. Is there anything you kind of, any thoughts you have in this area though?
Well, I think that there are tax means of making life easier for families. But really, we ought to remember as Conservatives that the main aim is to do all the things that we will be talking about at this conference, which is to grow the economy, to make sure people can keep more of their own money. And really, very few people at the moment of, when they're deciding to have another baby, say, oh, whoops, the tax incentive isn't good enough. So I think there is a limit to how much the tax system really improves life for some of the families we're most worried about. Though I don't think that's a reason for discounting it. I think we should always make sure it is on the agenda. But I do think that some of these other very practical community-centred help type interventions are useful too.
Okay, great. Do either of you two want to come in on this, or shall we move on to another theme? Yeah. So, okay, and I want to go to audience questions shortly, but you sparked in my mind perhaps a slightly controversial question, but by talking about incentives to have your next baby, it did make me wonder, and it's not really a mainstream part of the political debate in this country at all yet, but there are countries where governments have started to think society is aging. People are not having the number of children that they themselves say they want to have for a variety of reasons. And so I suppose the question for the panel is there a role for government not simply in trying to help the families and the children that are already here, but actually in promoting more children, more family formation with an aging population? Is that a direction you can see politics or Conservatives going in? Or is that still a little bit out there for us? I mean, I don't know, Danny. Is it unfair to?
Yeah. Well, no, it's fine. The backbencher can say it. Yeah, I'm a natalist. I think we should be supporting baby making. Is a good thing.
It's only 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
And of course the policy of the government should be to support the choices that people are making if it decides in a democratic state that those are right. So in a nutshell, where there is an appetite for larger families, which I think there is in this country, I think people would like to. I mean, they want to have children, and I don't agree with Victoria that tax incentives have no impact. I think that people do make, either directly or indirectly, economic decisions about family formation.
It's a limited impact.
Yeah. So I think that the systems that we've been discussing, where from everything from the size of homes to the model of childcare to the tax regime, these things have their effect. And I think we should be deciding that as a country it's important to address our demographic imbalance. And the birth rate is lower than it should be in this country. Across the West it is. And it feels absolutely appropriate to see why is that? Well, it's because it's so expensive to have a family, so we should make it cheaper to have a family, and I think that would be a popular policy.
I mean, just simply, we found in the family review that in our research that larger families as well as lone families were more likely to have financial difficulties. And I think there is something about supporting families, particularly with children under school age, and thinking about policies that can ensure particularly that families at that point are supported. And there are many, many different ways to do it. And I mean, we have seen, haven't we, in some East European countries where you have more than 3 children, you don't pay income tax. Now, I'm not suggesting that, but it certainly has brought the birth rate up. I wouldn't suggest that level of social engineering, but I do think we should be thinking about how we support particularly families with younger children and encouraging them. And I cannot tell you how many times I go to, because I go out and visit once, twice a week, and how many times young professionals, never mind the parents in the nurseries that I'm going to, but young professionals who are teachers and a wide range of public services are just worried about the costs and difficulties of having young children. And I think it's really, if we want larger families, then we're going to have to support them and think about how to support them.
All right, let's. Should we go to questions from the audience? And there are good hands going up already. We've got microphones going around. Please keep the questions succinct, and we'll take yours first, and then Gerard, the gentleman in the back row there.
Thank you. I'm Victoria Benson. I'm Chief Exec of Gingerbread, and we support single-parent families. We know that there are 2 million single-parent families in this country, and before the pandemic, they were twice as likely to be in poverty as couple parents. And that's, it's poverty that affects the child's outcome much more than being in a single-parent family. So clearly, single parents want to work and they need to work, but there was a drop in last week's stats from the single parents who were in work. So my question, I suppose, is I agree with you. The 2 things that need to happen to get single parents into work are, firstly, there need to be some flexible jobs. And I agree it's not about being home working, it's about being part-time. And secondly, the childcare system needs to work as well for single parents. So I suppose my question is, are there any plans to reform the childcare sector? And I know that Labour did talk about breakfast clubs, and I agree wraparound care is absolutely essential, but there has been a drop in the amount of wraparound care. And secondly, what can you do to support single parents into work?
Okay, well.
I can tackle some of this. Quite a lot of it's being dealt with both in Rachel's review and by the Department for Education at the moment, because they've been looking very carefully at ratios, for example, in childcare, which is something they've done a lot of work on in recent months. As I said, childcare is eye-wateringly expensive, and so I don't think we should think that there is some sort of magic wand that means that everybody's childcare will be funded for very small children. But I do think, and I know that the government is looking actively at ways of intervening that would help the largest number, if you like. I think, I remember from going to work with very tiny children that you not only have the cost, the financial cost, you also have the sheer grinding exhaustion of having to get everybody up and dressed and out and their lunchbox packed very early in the morning, which does take its toll, as Rachel says, on families of all types and all incomes, frankly. So we should never underestimate that, particularly for single parents who have to do it all on their own. When I say flexible work, I definitely don't just mean home working. I don't just mean flexible hours, actually. I do think there are things that we can start to engage with employers. If you have a child with a health condition, for example, if there could be a certain amount of time a year that you can attend appointments. I think there are lots of interventions that employers can consider that lead to true flexibility. So only a partial answer, but yes, the government is definitely looking at it.
Cool. And actually, just if I can use the question as a springboard, for the rest of the panel, it would be really interesting to get your views, your hopes or dreams of what could actually be done on childcare reform over the next couple of years. It's obviously a huge topic, but possibly one that's hard to fix.
I'll start off, perhaps. I definitely agree. It'd be great if we could, or at least look at relaxing the strictness of the child ratio rules. But I also think that, as far as I'm aware, I think the UK, or at least England, also has a less qualified sort of childcare workforce than lots of other countries like France. So I think if we are going to look at maybe relaxing the ratios, it would make a bit of sense perhaps to see if we could sort of upskill the workforce a little bit more. And then just another thing as well about really young kids, which I know we were just talking about. One of the things I think that the previous government was looking at was reforming parental leave. And I think my understanding is that the childcare costs are a lot more expensive for younger children. So perhaps a bit more of a slightly more generous parental leave might be one way to go about helping.
So I want us to get far more radical than just looking at ratios and things like that. There's so much that we could be doing in such a positive way with family framing as going around it. So I was a academy principal. I've led a number of academies and set up a large trust out in East Anglia, and I've been head teacher since 2005. And one of the things I did out in Great Yarmouth and Thetford and Lowestoft was make sure my schools were open from 8 in the morning till 6 at night, providing everything from breakfast right through to prep and some something to eat and some activities, extended day activities. Now we did this by sharing our budget, the 14 schools, and making that a priority. And with a bit of help, I don't see why we couldn't be doing that right across the country and giving parents of older children some real solutions. But also, rather than going in, it all feels a bit negative to be talking about ratios. Let's get positive. What kind of care do we want for? I'm a mum, mine's 27 now, but when I was thinking when mine was 2.5 about going back to part-time teaching, first I kind of used my lent on my sisters-in-law, and I looked after theirs during holidays. But also, when I was thinking about what would be the right sort of care and support, well, childminding, home, local, someone who could provide a home feeling. We should be looking at that childminding population. Why have they stopped? Why has it shrunk? It's shrunk because they're massively over-regulated by Ofsted. That is actually meant to be focused on school-age children. I mean, having an Ofsted every 3 years isn't going to keep childminders safe. We should have local childminding hubs based in schools with early years, and we can have nurseries based in schools as well, and they can be providing support and care, and also the intelligence around safeguarding. There's some really positive family framed what mums and others would really want, kind of care responses. And I'd like to see some creative thinking. We could solve this in a way that really has integrity. So I mean, that's where I'd start.
That's just so good. I mean, it's music to my ears. I'm really inspired by that, because I do think we need greater flexibility, and we need to trust families more with the money that's available to use in a way that works for them. In the context of good regulation and wider social provision in the community. It doesn't all have to be at home. But I do agree about childminders needing a revival of that. I mean, the fact is we don't really have a policy, a sort of framework of provision for children from when the statutory parental leave ends at 6 months, and then when the childcare offer kicks in at 3, unless you're on a low income and it kicks in at 2. So there is this swathe of children and families with very small kids who are basically on a very, very tough, having a very, very tough time, and we're not really doing enough to support them. And again, it goes back to this point that, as a country, we kind of think nothing really matters until the kids go to school, and then you can go back to work, at which point we'll get involved in your life again. Actually, we are involved in the lives of children and families at the younger age. So I think we need more flexibility and support. And I mean, without getting into the The exact sort of fiscal balance, my view, I don't know if Rachel agrees because she's been talking about older kids, but shouldn't we be front-loading child benefit more? Shouldn't we be putting more of that money into the early years and maybe less into the teenage years if we can support teenagers well? I mean, okay, let's just find some more money to... But if it is a case of doing it within existing budgets, which I suspect it is for Victoria, I would prioritise the early years over the teens.
All right. Question at the back there, and then we'll come over here as well.
Yeah, that was a bit helpful. Thank you very much. I'm just interested to know, on the difficult subject of what does the panel think the effect of no-fault divorce will have on families? Because surely that's going to be more important than tax cuts.
Okay.
Can I jump in quickly as the probably the only there's a couple of MPs here. I rebelled. I think my only rebellion, my long 3-year career as an MP, was on that measure. And I thought it was the wrong step to take, because for the simple reason that it essentially nullifies the marriage vow at the moment that it is spoken, because you're no longer in a binding covenant. You're in a contract that you can leave at will as an individual. So I have a sort of quite principled objection to that measure. And I noticed, in fact, that stats out this week saying that since it came into effect last year, divorces have risen dramatically. So there might have been pent-up demand. Let's hope so. I mean, I do recognise the rationale for it. The agony of a disputed divorce is very detrimental to the couple and to their children. So I understand why people wanted to reduce the animus involved in divorce, but I think we could have done that better. So yes, Edward Lee said to me, I remember, we've got to revoke this down because in 20 years' time, when divorce has gone through the roof, you need to be able to say you didn't support this. So that's what I did.
Any other views on the panel on this one?
Well, yes, I coming at this from a legal perspective, I do think that it probably was the right way to go, and I did in fact vote for it. I didn't do much matrimonial work when I was in private practice, but the bit I did see really, really shocked me to the core. And I think, having said all the things we said earlier about welcoming families of all types and not just predicating one type of relationship, namely marriage, I think we can all agree that marriage is a very good foundation for family life and is certainly something that we as a government think is a useful basis for society. And I personally think that more should be done to support people when they're considering splitting. Not just if they have children, but particularly possibly if they have children, and that a bit of effort put in then. We do have very high divorce rates in this country. We also have very high rates of people not getting married in the first place. Marriage has become something, well, Rachel said earlier, that is done often in better off communities and not necessarily across the board. And if marriage is something we want to promote, not as the only ideal, but as one good basis, then we need to put a bit of welly into helping people stay together. Because, as I said, those early years with tiny children are blooming hard work.
Okay, yep, lots of questions. Okay, you've got your microphone already.
It's one for everyone. Perhaps Danny and Rachel would be more free to answer. But what sort of targeted approaches would you be in favour of over the coming months to those families who are experiencing an almost overnight shock to their mortgage payments as a result of last week's mini budget, to the point where potentially they're in danger of losing their home, and it's their biggest outgoing. And also maybe for Rachel, I think at the outset you said it was very important for the government to centre families with every policy. Were families at the centre of the mini budget?
If you just pass the microphone forward. Ed, who wants to go first?
Well, the broader plan to support families, very significant steps have been taken already by the government to support household budgets, including with the energy cap, which will significantly reduce the inflationary effects of what's going on. What we need to see, in my view, is in addition to this, to the economic supply side reforms that we're going to see, deregulation to support growth and enterprise, we need a social supply side revolution as well to strengthen families and communities themselves, to help people with the pressures they're under, and to create a society that over the medium term to long term is more resilient and able to withstand these kind of economic shocks, and ultimately reduces demand for acute public sector public services. We do spend too much on criminal justice. As Victoria said, many people are on out-of-work benefits. We need to support families and communities to reduce that sort of high and expensive acute spending. But I don't think we should be taking an axe to public spending or indeed to benefits to balance the books at this stage. We need to strengthen families and communities in order to reduce demand on the state.
So, sorry.
You know, go ahead, please.
Ready to go. The two things of most concern to most of the families we spoke to, and we spoke right across the country, were cost of living and childcare. And I think that came across, that was across the piece. And I think we did learn quite a lot about how families wanted that approached, and they talked to us a lot, childcare particularly, and that's what those comments I made earlier really came from thinking about what families had talked to me about. I also think government should be really one of the things that I'm looking at in part 2 of the family review is trying to revive David Cameron's old family test and make it something, a living, breathing thing that's based on, that has a proper outcomes framework and data sharing sitting underneath it, but that every bit of policy that's looked at should be looked at through the eyes of the policy, including benefits. And that's why I have argued very strongly. I did argue that, any benefit cut for families with children would be something that I'd find extra deeply concerning. And, I did argue, for example, to keep the parents with children, to keep the UC uplift. I did argue for that. I know that's contentious. But for me, children's well-being, absolutely central there.
Right, I'm conscious that lots of people want to ask questions. We've got 10 minutes left. Can I just get a set? How many people are waiting? So we've got lots. I'm going to group some questions together then. Gentleman's already got the microphone, I think. So if you want to ask yours first and then just pass the microphone forward, please.
Thank you. I was wondering actually if we could hear from the rest of the panel on this crucial question of fiscal drag effectively. Is it necessary that family benefits are uprated in line with inflation as we confront the fallout from the mini budget?
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, just thank you for organising this panel. I came to the conference, I think my 3rd year in a row, and I've never yet seen a panel on families, although I've scoured the agenda, so thank you. I just wanted to ask, do you think more should be done to support families who, particularly with young children, who want to look after children themselves rather than childcare? Thank you.
Okay, great. And then right at the front as well, please.
Hi, I've got one question for Rachel de Souza, which is... so why do you think it is that government ministers shy away from talking about the importance of family? And one question for Victoria Prentis, which is, do you think it would help the long-term unemployed get back into work if employers asked more about family or made more kind of adjustments on account of people's family circumstances?
Okay, great. Thank you. So we'll take those 3 first. So the question of the impact of inflation on family benefits and the importance of uprating in line. The question, which I think in a way it features into the tax discussion that we've had as well, but whether government should do more to support families who want to look after their children themselves rather than using formal childcare. And then there were 2 sort of more directed questions. Rachel, do you want to take the one that was directed at you first about do you think that ministers shy away from these issues?
I think it's probably that they've been unnecessarily sensitive. I think it genuinely is like, this is people's private lives and we don't want to sound moralistic. Whereas I hope what we've shown with our family review is that actually people want a consideration of families, when policy's been made, and want to talk about families, everything. So I don't think it's it's never conspiracy. I think it's something quite simple. It's about what there are all different types of families, and how do I talk about this without offending people, and how do I, and I hope what we've done with the family review is kind of show that there isn't a problem there, and you really do, we really do need to get into this space in terms of language and politics. And I mean, I just wanted to pick up the answer to staying at home with your own child. I mean, I did it, but I did it And I did it, you know, I didn't go back to work full time until mine was 5, and I worked part time from nursery, you know, a part time nursery when he was able to go to part time nursery. And, you know, I was lucky, I had sisters-in-law and family, and we worked it so that we could do it, and made quite a lot of personal sacrifices. And I think the interesting thing would be how government could understand that it's not just the nuclear family and then you say, give me the money to be able to stay at home. It's how can we genuinely work with a model of our family, friends and communities, and how we can look after our children together in a really good way, you know, and how mums can be helped to look after children, but in a way that works with a genuine understanding of family and where the support is. Now, I know that's a bit obtuse, but I think given the complexity of family and how supportive it is, we could do so much more to help women who want to stay at home. You wouldn't have got me back to work in those first... No salary would have made me go back to work in those first couple of years of my child's life. That's a personal choice from me. Many of my colleagues ran back to work. I mean, and I think employers and businesses can get involved too. I know when I ran a academy trust of 14 schools, many of my women professionals and senior women had babies, so I made sure that I put nurseries on site, managed really flexible working, and being able to access and see and be with their children. And I think, you know, particularly babies, and I do think we need to do everything we can there.
All right, Victoria.
Well, I'm just going to violently agree with Rachel again. I think flexibility, by which I mean real flexibility, is at the heart of a lot of this. So I went back when my daughter was 4 months old. That was the deal in those days. But I didn't go back full time, and I job shared very enthusiastically for a very, very long period. And I have to say now, my children have left home, though one went back to the university today with a few tears, and I have a Ukrainian who lives with us who is not a child, but nevertheless definitely requires some support at different points of the week. And I think that's important. And those I work with have to understand that that's the deal, you know, with me, really. So coming on to the specific question for me, which was, can companies do more to help the long-term unemployed get back into work? Well, yes, frankly, and our big worry area in DWP at the moment, we have many, but one of them is people in their 50s who have left the workforce after COVID and will not come back, and we need their skills, we need their experience, and with the tightness of the labour market, we desperately need them back into work. So I hosted a series of roundtables last week with employers to find out what more they could do to encourage these people back. These are people not only dealing with the younger end, but also, certainly in my case, with the elderly parent end of family life. And we do have twin pressures on us. Doesn't mean we can't work, doesn't mean we can't work full time, but we do possibly require a little bit of understanding about it.
Great. Luke, and the questions that are still out there, I suppose, to answer about uprating family benefits.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Fantastic. I think maybe the things like fiscal drag might be a little bit beyond my area of expertise. I don't really understand inflation, apart from the fact my own bill's going up. So, but just to build on basically what we were talking about a little bit earlier about the just now about helping people spend more time with their kids and looking after their own kids. I do think that our sort of proposals on reforming marriage allowance would help that, because one of the main reasons people don't spend more time at home, work part-time so they have more time at home, is because they can't afford to. So, you know, if you make it sort of more financially possible to be able to do that, I think people will do that. And just again on the, I completely agree on the point about the need for involving extended family in sort of raising a kid. I can't remember the phrase, it takes a village to raise a child. Yeah. One of the things that's really worrying that we found in our research is that the proportion of people living close to their parents is elderly parents, people parents over the age of like 60 or whatever, has increased over the last 10 years, and that's quite worrying because you sort of rely on that proximity on both ends. You rely on that proximity because you know, your parents are great at helping provide care for their grandkids. And the other way as well, it's sort of helpful to be around nearby your elderly parents when they're getting on a bit, and so you can help them with the shopping or whatever. And that's in decline because, as Stanley was talking about earlier, one of the ways we could sort of look at sorting this is like a financial sort of incentive like they have in Japan. But another thing I think which is really important is making sure that young people can get ahead where they are. So one of the things that the Johnson government was really on it about was this whole idea of being able to stay local and go far. And if you deliver that, then people won't need to leave home and go to a different side of the country to sort of to find work and get on. So I think if we solve that, then a lot of these pressures will decrease as well.
Okay. We're running really short on time. What I'd like to do is take really quick questions there. I think, are you still waiting? No, you're okay? Okay. And then really fast, so the three ladies over on this side. All the questions in quick succession, and then I'll give each of our panellists a chance to give some final remarks, hopefully picking up on the bits of your questions they want to address. So, please.
Thank you. So, as a school governor, I agree with the gentleman at the back. The parents and families that we're supporting in schools that are keeping their heads just above water right now are about to be faced by a tsunami. And it's not 6 months or 9 months down the line, it's immediate. So 2 questions, yes or no. Could you consider scrapping the cap on the 2-child policy in welfare support and topping up free school meal support to schools that are already underpaying, so we're having to top up from our school budgets to meet the cost of free school meals, and then subsidise that throughout every school holiday?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I just want to speak a little bit about the huge mental health crisis we're seeing in young people in this country. And I think it comes back a lot to what you're all saying about supporting families of younger children, because I was a social worker and I am a mother of 7 children. You're welcome. And I have stayed at home with my children. And a lot of the studies I did on children's development was the fact that children emotionally, the patterns are set by the age of 5. The way they respond, their patterns for life, for managing problems. Now, if there is a stable, caring parent who's able to be at home with their child, I think we need to encourage that, because that will save us money down the line in terms of mental health issues, delinquency, all of these other things that we see. Because just creating that secure environment in the first 5 years of life is so vitally important. And just what I love what all of you are saying, and it's so pro-family, but your civil servants are not getting the memo. We're experiencing a lot of parent blaming in terms of children's mental health. Often the parents are blamed, and parents are feeling disempowered. And I work a lot with parents across the country, so and this is what we're finding.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Tamara Sandul from Carers UK. There's a huge 10 million unpaid carers across the UK providing care for their family and friends. What more can the Conservative government do to support them to continue that care, but also to stay and work, because we're finding a significant proportion of those carers are actually falling into poverty as a result of their caring role, especially now amidst the cost of living crisis. Thank you.
Great. And then last one.
Councillor Ruth Butter. I'm the lead member for Children's Services in Dudley, and we haven't spoken before, but actually my question is, we only about 6% of our children who have learning disabilities end up in employment, and actually when I speak to those young people, their real desire is to be in employment, to have that, dignity of work. But the schools often are failing them. They're not preparing them for adulthood. We're not preparing the parents either for that. We're not giving them the aspiration. So we have one group of young people who used to be classed the mild to moderate, learners who want to go out at work. And then we have a group of young children with severe learning disabilities, where once they get to 19, they literally fall off a cliff edge, and parents have the awful decision of either having to put them into long-term residential care, which, is poor outcome for the child and the family, and also for a council it's ruinously expensive, or the parent has to give up work to stay at home with that child who's got special needs. So I think it is a really multifaceted issue, and Rachel, it's really lovely to hear you. I've read your reports, they're fantastic, but I think we need to address families in their wider context and look at children who've got additional needs as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. Those were magnificent questions, and I wish we had a lot longer. All I'm going to have time to do is give each of our panellists a chance to quickly sum up their thoughts on this topic. And if they can hit any of those notes, mental health, learning disabilities, the role of unpaid carers, the 2-child cap, and free school meals, that would obviously be wonderful. But Danny, do you want to start with you? And
I echo that, and thank you. Really good conversation, isn't it, to have had. And sorry if this sounds a cop-out. I mean, my answer to everything is more community, and I just think we need and the role of government is to be flexible and to endorse the positive choices that people want to make and get behind them financially. My sympathies are with you about the third child rule. As being kind of pro baby making, I think it is a little perverse. But ultimately, we do need people to be able to support their families financially, which is what we're all here discussing. So my sympathies are with you there, but I'm not going to opine on it particularly. In general, and the free school meals question applies here too. The government's holiday activities fund was a really good answer to a problem that came along during the pandemic. The model there of government supporting civil society to support families is absolutely the right one. Absolutely applies to mental health. I really recognise the point about unpaid carers. We all get that a lot in our casework. It's the great submerged workforce, wonderful people who are very, very sacrificial and doing this amazing work in their families. And I wish government could be more overt in supporting them. And the same applies to, particularly, I recognise the point about adults with learning difficulties. So a more flexible system by which government is getting behind not just families, as we've been discussing, but the community institutions that support families. That would be my panacea.
Luke.
Fantastic. Yeah, the main ones I think I would pick up there are mental health and unpaid carers. So on the unpaid carers thing, I think I would again point back to our brilliant report, which shows that it wouldn't cost that much to be able to give a tax cut to people that care for their relatives or their friends. On mental health, we just brought out a report recently which looked at this in great detail, called "The Kids Aren't All Right." You can read it on our website. Basically, that showed that a lot of the problems with young people aged 18 to 34-year-old sort of age, they have mental health problems. A lot of that is, as you say, to do with child development and the fact that the way that we raise our children has changed so much in the last 30 years. So it's not our research, it's someone else's. I think Nuffield Trust sponsored it. Showed that the age at which kids go out and play by themselves and with their friends has gone up by 2 years in the last generation. And that has a really profound impact because it's kids going out and sort of spending time with other kids without parents being overprotective and overbearing that lets them build emotional resilience and social skills. And if we take that away from them, then that is going to be the impact. It's going to be worse mental health.
Victoria?
Well, I think it's right that we're talking about all these really difficult issues in quite a frank way. And I think I agree with everybody, actually, that there are no panaceas to this. We know that people work for lots of reasons to go to the employability of some people with special educational needs, for example. We know that those people can really get value out of work that is far greater than economic. But I think it is fair when we look at family policy that we realise that the best way to support families, we know that the most financially lucrative way to support families is if we can get people into work. But from the rest of the conversation, it's completely clear that we have to do that in a way that works with and round families, and that's families in the very widest sense. I came to my new role, and there's no better role for a politician, because most of us, after all, go into politics to make the lives of the most vulnerable better. I came from my previous role, which was focused on ag and fish, but also on food poverty. And something that became very clear to me during the pandemic is how detailed the evidence is that we need of the effects of our policies. So that isn't a cop-out, and I'll have a chat with you later about specifics. But I do think that we need to take the decisions we take this winter very carefully and on the basis of some very granular evidence.
And Rachel, final word to you, please.
So I just want to mention first families looking after disabled children or disabled members of families, which our colleague from Dudley picked up there. And young carers, I really want to pull out. I know you were talking about carers right the way through, but young carers in schools, I mean, we're talking to them all the time, and they're saying, you know, that people, you know, the schools and services often don't even know who they are. Yeah. And I really would like to see more support go in there. And around some of the other areas, mental health, the mental health issue, you know, I did that survey, the big ask of 500,000 of England's children, that's 6% of children from all 151 local authorities, every kind of child background you can imagine. And mental health, mental well-being came up as the biggest concern. But when I asked them, so what's the answer? They wanted to receive support locally from people they trusted, from school, and be picked up at school. And I think what's interesting is how, coming out of the pandemic as well, I think schools very much proved themselves as the places that families could trust to support them. You know, my schools were delivering mattresses during the pandemic, visiting homes, giving out food parcels. They very much became a centre of the communities. And I think therein lies an answer. And I'm going to push this to have a bit of vision about that. What could we be doing, cradle to career support around schools, making sure our family, we've got a period of time now where roles are falling, there's capital, those buildings are free. What could we be building around children and families in those civic spaces so that children and families could receive the support that they needed, whether it's a hot meal, whether it's breakfast, whether it's mental health support, whether it's those extended activities, playing together. You know, that's what will make your mental health better anyway as a child, and to be able to get support. So I just throw that in kind of as an answer to all of it. There's so much more we could do with what we've got if we have a bit of vision.
All right. I'm going to be in trouble for letting us overrun, but hopefully you all agree that the discussion was worth it. Please come to more CPS CapEx events, and please join me in thanking our panel in the usual way.